Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Tuesday Melt Battle Lounge with the 2MK team. Hopefully my sound is alright. We are starting up right away with some Roa on CL action. Depending on what you understand about this game, that's a lot weirder than it sounds. This is the second stream we've had for the day, and technically this is the stream meant for the North American player base. However, once again, if you are anywhere on the coast of the Atlantic Ocean, there's a decent chance you have a good enough connection to the lounge members to have some good matches, especially with the quality of the rollback in this game. We normally have some people join in later on, and I often have more analytic stuff to say about that then. But today for this one, the topic I wanted to talk about is complex enough that it's not necessarily sensible to start talking about it when it's just within the team. Because we are talking about when your opponent has signaled the change in their mindset. Are they going for a strike? Are they going for offense now? Are they waiting for you so that they can do something? And those things can be connected to both their meter and their just general mind state. This is the standard winner stays on lobby, but there is a limit. If you win 3 times, then you will probably be pushed back. Partially for variety and partially because generally something's often gone slightly off somewhere. Maybe the person who joined in is a little too high relative to the skill level of the casual/occasional players that we sometimes get. That said, most of what I did intend to talk about will probably only come up if someone else does join, so you can expect the stream to be a little quiet until that sort of thing appears. If you're familiar with our streams from other games, it'll be a little clearer who I mean, but in this case you've got 1 Arcade, 1 CL, 1 Roa, and probably 1 Coma. The additional capacity to shield both jumps and to air shield against anti-airs in this game generally causes the same sort of flow to happen. You have to spend a lot more time thinking about whether or not your opponent's mental state is actually an attack or not. Even when your opponent has moves such as those that Coma has, where you are explicitly armoring through things or powering up things, you can't be sure that just having used the armor means that Coma actually intends to attack you. It could just be to buy time or cause you to retreat and be unwilling to attack yourself. There aren't necessarily that many people who have that mindset as a core thing, but it's enough there that you will eventually need to learn to deal with it. Similarly, the speed this game moves at, just baiting people into things is a much less likely prospect.
You win. Turn your magic circuit. Fight.
ここから飛ばす
シャウター。
行くぞナイスもらちょいと言ってな次ここし生きるやるなどうだ浅いおっちいチリナ本気にさせたなたまんねえな大きくたまんねえなやるねどうだ浅い切るなよビバビーノ立てよまだ手足があるじゃんやれやれ一度しかない命を
オープンユアマジックサーキット。ファイト。
こぼす大きなたま新合輪サンたまんねえなやるねバラスここらで決めるか仕留めやるね踊楽しいね行くぞどうだ続けるコンボサンビバビーノ朝仕留め飛ばす大きな本気にする朝まだボンプの勢いですかもうちょいと楽しませてくれよ
ターンユアマジックサーキット。ファイト。フェイタル。
ビバビーノ遅いセーフ
カウンター。
やるそこだろセーフ軽いねタップここからだそらよバラスたまんぼい死にあらやるなお分かり
カウンター。
たま飛ばすやるなやるなお分かりやるな朝六強解除ほらよ遅い朝未熟ここから出直せやるの本気ってやつだ
KO。You win。転生の終焉です。赤社の蛇。
さてそうであればよいのですが
オープンユアマジックサーキット。ファイト。
セーク
これでカウンター。
遅い。
深くで
ほら
痛いじゃん。スナップゼロゼロひょいやっせ
ちょいと言ってな。
深くで倒れなさい。逃がしません。
たまんな。チリな。熱いくせ。
もう一度ゼロゼロ
耐えてくれよ。
倒す見せてあげましょう。ゼロ
息苦しい。
おで
どう
笑わせます。そこで
そこだろ。
スナップ
セク
せ試合を終わってはいません。
いいもん。
ターンはマジか本気です。ファイト今
そこだろ。熱いくせ。
深くです
遅い。ほうたま
強襲せ
ここからだ。生きるなよ。
解きなさい。不要なり
たまんねえな。
もう一度カウンター
ほらよ。
終わりですか。せい
たまんねえ。やめとけ。
強襲
ほうたまん
シュッ思い知りなさい。
やる。息苦しい。
あらカウンター
もらい
そちらゼロ
もらい。
無駄です。
それ
カウンター
ほらよ。
笑わせません。いや何時天文に至らず
やる。ここまで決めるか。
倒す。
目も当てられない。遅い。
兵の再婚が果たされないなど。ユーウィン天性の修練です。はマジックサーカシャのヘビファイ
セク
ト強襲
たまんね
カウンターやっときなさい。キャリバー
え。たまんねえ
今
な。
そこでカウンターやっ飛ばせ。キャリバー逃がしません。
生きるんだ。
笑わせます。
やる。
傷強襲
やる。ここまで決めるか。
深くでした。
目も当てられない。セ
カウンター
やりセ
笑わせカウンターやっ飛ばせ。キャリバー逃がしません。
そうか。
せいを決まりまし。ターンユアマジックサーキットファイトカウンター
たまんね
やっときなさい。
楽しい。ライソ伝送。
深くです。弱いアン
いいんだ
カウンター
よ。お別れだ。
もう一度ゼロゼッひょい
もらい。
シュッ反省ゼロ
たぶんいいんじゃねえの。セ
カウンターそれで
生きるなよ。踊って
まだまだ
せここか。
ゼロツーザ
やり
強襲
ほうやり
ゼロゼッ KO
というなんという。
チリはチリに天性の終焉オープンユアマジックサークファイト
セク
セッカウンター
下です。
深くです。そこですせいやゼロそこです
楽しい。
もう一度ゴンチ
踊って話す。
終わりですゼロ
いいんじゃねえの。
逃がしません。
どう
笑わせ
セ
喉を潰す
いいんじゃ。
カウンター KO
One of the main effects of having a game this fast is that you must become much better at picking up on your opponent's signals.
ファイト
遅い。
We're talking about a game where a person might change their capacity, their particular thought process relative to attacking or defending, much more slowly than their character actually could.
やっときなさい。不要ない
ここか。
強襲だそれで
And with that quickness,
カウンター
from the other side to be ready for which thing you need to do is similarly your own problem. Can you recognize that your opponent has gone into defensive mode and therefore might actually hit you in some specific way quickly enough to go into the state of baiting them or something similar?
いい戦いの後はいい食事。
ヒアカムスはニューチャレンジャー。
水郷極まったか。羨ましい話だ。
寄り道するつもりはないんだけど。オープンユアマジックサーキット。ファイト。離れて。カウンター。やっちゃな。したよ。やっ。
行くぞ。
カウンター。終わり。逃がさない。カウンター。カウンター。諦めなさい。行くわよ。さよなら。まだまだ猫返し。これはさよなら。そこね。そう
軽い
やったま
気にさせたな。
まだま気分はどう？逃がさない。
新ゴール
ここね。吹っ飛べ。飛べ。カウンター。
浅いライ
カウンター。期待外れ。ユーウィン。ターンユアマジックサーキット。ファイト。
This matchup in particular is a lot about that. Since both of these characters can armor through so many things that the other does, while that sort of interaction is definitely really important, there's a lot of thing here where you're thinking to yourself, okay, this only works if my opponent is currently in mental state for defense. It's completely counterable if they are not. This isn't always a matter of speed either, because sometimes it's literally impossible. The move they need to do in order to counter whatever you've chosen to do isn't quick, meaning that if they were ready to guess, if they responded on practically frame 1, they will win. Well, frame 1 of the window where a reasonable person could react. But even 1 or 2 frames of delay in that due to just not being in that mental state would mean, no, I don't actually respond in time, and I couldn't respond in time. Even trying would be a bad idea. This game also has fairly high accuracy requirements for any given player, and those two things also play into this quite a lot. For example, there, my opponent realized, or maybe guessed, that I was going to defend, and while I did react to what was happening, it was simply too slow to actually manage it.
ぼす
まだ離れて
軽い命
やったわフェイト気分はどう逃がさなおりゃおまもう怒った猫返しさよなら
明日の境界
私好きですけど消えなさい You win
On top of all that, understanding what options your opponent has available to them at a particular space,
この国の古い根血
depending on whether or not they're thinking of defending or attacking, can cut down the number of things in total that you need to think about. Okay, at least one person heading out. This match is one of the matches where it matters the most, because Arcwade's ability to attack CL when she goes into the air is a little limited sometimes. She's not so great at attacking straight forward in that position other than with that, meaning that she spends more time trying to figure out whether or not CL thinks it's time for her to do attacking or not. Her ability to just stay up there, more or less, is something you have to be ready for a lot in Arcwade spaces, and because she similarly wins a lot of the low-level clashes of their buttons, you don't get to spend the same amount of time pushing people around. Even if you have the tools to hit the character, the main thing you're always looking for is, do I have the space and is my opponent in the mindset I would need to actually get this done? This, for example, is effective when the opponent plans to attack, but not at all if their concept is to defend more. Similarly there, because she lacks the invincibility to get through a lot of CL's defenses, you have to be really sure that your opponent is somehow in defense mode in order to get away with your stuff. The same thing happens if you're thinking about defending from a particular spot on screen. Sometimes you can use your character's skills to break through your opponent's attack, and other times you want to just position yourself as perfectly as possible for whatever your goal is. Similarly there, my opponent decided, I have thrown enough keys, now you're probably going to block and I can throw you.
おっとまだまだおっと甘く見てたさよなら危ない全トゥーだやったわ私の全てあなたにだけは負けたくないトライ
And that was a similar interaction. Believing my opponent is now going to become defensive enough to stay on the ground, but not defensive enough to do nothing, I could prime myself to wait for that and get that option then. It does not matter as much in this matchup in the same way, but a lot of the time, because of their similar ranges, Arcwade is looking for a moment to land something because Roa wanted to start an action. Her options therefore end up fairly limited, but even this ending is much of the same thing. I'm spending a lot of time here trying to figure out what to do based on the mental state of my opponent. For example, there I should probably have gone for an invincible move instead of the moon version of the move because I thought the position was going to be correct, but it was not. I can generally assume that this opponent will be defensive more often than trying to interrupt things despite the character, but because of that, I'm also aware that they will have more possible options for defense. This comes up really often because players who spend a lot of time on offense tend to only think relatively one-dimensionally when it comes to defense. So they tend to do the same thing on defense a lot of the time. But here I have to look out for all the defensive options that are available because my opponent is a defensive enough player to see them all.
ちょいと言ってな。
まだまだおまけ。
ここか。
これはいい度胸ね。諦める。おまけ。
待たせたな。遅い。
やったわね。それで
俺それその福音を持って汝を性別するかわしきがこの地に神のおらぬ土地はなし。
Scaling in this game always surprises me when it comes to things like that.
まだまだそこね。そう下よ行くわよ。下よ行くわよ。諦めない。よっとそういうユーウィン。ターンはマジックサー黙って。
But you can also use this sort of thing to change your opponent's perspective on whether or not they should attack or defend in certain ways. And then take advantage of that. But you can only do it for a certain amount of time, because obviously they'll realize what's going on and change their mindset. So I've burned all of my resources, but the benefit now is that I have a different feeling. I've managed to get the match to a different point, so my opponent's way of thinking about whether or not offense or defense is happening has had to change. I basically bought myself time to think about more options I have, and they similarly have to deal with options I have. Too slow. Bringing us to that point. The push at that moment was make my opponent defend hard enough, because we have so little health left to worry about. That sort of interaction is really helpful simply because it's not going to recur. It's not something that one can afford to have in mind during the normal flow of a match, especially not in a game like this one where one of the things you must focus on is how to not necessarily avoid damage entirely, but reduce it, as that's the main way you'd manage to keep yourself safe from certain situations. Trying to stand still for too long will generally get you killed, so why bother doing that way? That was a combination, for example, of spacing plus the thing I'm talking about. It's not terribly easy for Roa when under pressure to hit Arcwade when she does that move. But in that situation, it's much easier to hit her because that's what the player is thinking about, with good reason. That, for example, was technically a drop, because I was aiming to get over my opponent's head with that, watch them retreat, and then use the moon pounce again. In that case, that was just misspaced. Perfectly spaced for the escape. And similarly, there I expected defense and got offense. The only way that the move I was planning to use would have worked, though, was for my opponent to definitely not be in mentally offense mode. They would definitely have had to be on defense enough to worry about what the blue flash I was about to use was, because she has a couple where the uppercut will not do exactly what you expect. We are back to Shiki. Well, no, I guess it's not back to everyone else. I don't know if I got to mention this on the last stream that much, but the general way to deal with this character is a little bit counterintuitive, because his strengths come from his long capacity to continue doing whatever he wants, and relatively good ability to get it done heavily. But unless the player is fairly good, Shiki players are like Ed players in Street Fighter V. They don't really play much neutral, and they don't really have a lot of good options for dealing with you when you jump into the air near them, because they're relying on a specific height for their combos. Unlike a lot of other characters in this game where you just get to do what you want and just have better combo routes in whatever direction, I'm not sure if Shiki doesn't have these, but I don't see many players at the mid-levels using them, meaning that you get to spend a lot of time pushing around this character. But that was a rush where Anu misjudged whether or not the opponent was going to defend or not. They were still in mentally defense mode and therefore didn't get caught. It still fits in with the general model of the character, because that was technically almost what you should have expected. He didn't want to play footsies, so he stayed in defense mode. In fact, it's that understanding that Shiki players don't want to play footsies that you can use to give yourself an understanding of what they're trying to do when they move. If you're not trying to move in order to get into footsie range, then there's a much bigger chance that any movement of that type is entirely intended to bait the opponent into doing something like this. That was a good jump over. There you go, good example. I am so sure that I will do this. I am so unwilling to try to play the close range game fully that I'm going to just raw super. And And while I wouldn't necessarily suggest Roa players to use up all their meter doing this, it's more or less the same sort of thing. Stayed a little too close and therefore got jumped on, but being ready for the jump would have been the same thing. This character does a lot of damage and can keep it up for a while, which is another good reason for this. He's actually fairly throwable, but because he doesn't want to play footsies, getting into the position where throwing him is a good idea is very difficult. Because he will do more moves in neutral in order to push you back. And it's quite often possible for those moves to mess with anyone trying to catch him just with the throw. Having those long moves means that he doesn't really have to block. In fact, the only time you'd get a throw on him is probably when he's trying to get close and shield at the last moment. And it's just not worth trying to make that a part of your game, as Shigi players have a good hitbox on their downward attack, and therefore don't really have a lot of reason to actually not just jump. Being off the ground is close enough to perfect for the game plan that you just don't care about it. However, as just demonstrated by Omni, if you feel like the player is going to miss with that, for whatever reason, then you've got a good reason to go for the throw, because it's the one space where you will get a chance to just do this. Similarly, good defense at close range can lead to this happening, even when your opponent has a lot of meter. Scaling though. That was a good choice. Being off the ground yourself or at maximum possible range is usually a good way to get to mess this player type up, simply because Shiki's damage, while great, doesn't necessarily confirm as well in that position. So you're back to, I'm reducing the damage I'm taking, I'm tanking through this character. And if they're the type to run, you usually can get heat off in that moment when you see them back off. Not stand there and activate heat, but you explicitly saw them back off or knew they were going to, and then did it. So it's very easy to come to the conclusion this character is super top tier if your concept of how to defend against him is to actually block. He's devastating if he gets started and you were defending, because he'll just lock you down. And almost all of his moves, even the ones that scale kind of harsh on the player, lead to more stuff that you're usually okay with, as the Shiki player that is. Like, other characters, I wouldn't necessarily assume that that was going to be a death combo, but I'm surprised it wasn't one just now. That's just what I assume Shiki is going to cause. He's also not terribly easy to shield against, so that makes it worse. One of your better options is to use your 2-hit moves, because his clashes aren't as great, but even then, he still could just go for even more gutsy stuff and you'd just be in trouble then. But yep, just tank on through it. Still, that opener led to a much bigger damage than you'd expect all of the time. he doesn't need to spend a lot of time defending himself with just tapping 2A or similar. Ime's match is kind of hyper, but not necessarily in a way that is terribly unfun or hard to deal with. You do have to bear in mind though that if you can't see when to throw him, things will probably get a little bit difficult. That moment, for example, would have been a good one to use for it because the opponent is definitely, again, rushing up with no intention of actually playing footsies, no intention of specifically attacking, which means that their main plan could only really be to dash up and shield or to go for a specific type of long lunging move. Fortunately though, long lunging moves in this game tend to get caught by throws for various reasons. The throwing player advances into the hurt box of the attacker and tends to grab them out of it before the actual active frames. I love how signature phrase actually comes up as signature phrase.
You win. Turn your magic set. Fight. Open your magic set. Fight.
下だ見えるかいチリナやるのやるの次だ見える君の生きそこだろ生きるなそこだろビバビールの攻撃にさせたなたまオーバラス遅い遅い動くここから
A similar concept for role play in general that we've come across is that actually committing to using any of his strong shielding attacks isn't always a good idea. They take so long to recover from that if you mistime them and your opponent is able to outmaneuver them in basically any way, even with a long animation, let's say, required for this, Roa tends to still get punished. So you find there are a lot of positions in which role players are basically going to do nothing, despite having quote-unquote zoning tools, it's easier to consider the idea that, you know what, I could zone you, and therefore you're probably going to at least consider that. But in general, I've noted that you're better off not assuming that that's going to happen. It depends on how much meter he has and how much health you have, but as a game plan in general, you can spend a lot of time assuming that you're not going to get zoned by Roa that much. If you play particularly cautiously, it feeds into the problem. Roa is more able to do that, partially because you are doing those things. From the reports I'm getting, we are probably ending a stream, not necessarily after this match, but probably whatever follows. Which might be just this match again, who knows. CL isn't quite the same because of the way her keys work, but someone like me will definitely continue to fight her like that. It's just like, yes, I know you can zone me, but I don't really care, so I'm just not going to pay attention to this. Because in order to commit to zoning, she has to risk taking more damage than she would otherwise. So in terms of just raw interactions, if you literally flipped a coin every time we tried to interact, I would win, let's say, because whenever I win the toss, I do more damage than CL does. This is particularly true because as you fight through it with low meter, the specific confirms that you end up dealing with are smaller. It is partially why keys are so functionally strong as a whole, because honestly, if they weren't, people would just disregard them, I feel. But if you give CL the concept that you can be zoned, she will take that space and she will control it for as long as she possibly can, which is really good as an overall strategy. But if you've got the willingness to just sit through it, it won't always work. In short, I have no intention of standing still, even though this can happen, because I'm not going to die. As you get stronger and stronger opponents though, this obviously tapers off. Situations in which you could be confident you were going to survive become more explicitly death loops. That isn't to say that this is just always true though. There are positions at which, without a lot of meters, CL still can't just keep pumping out damage. Roa, on the other hand, doesn't have quite the same issue, let's say. Roa is explicitly not going to zone, not going to necessarily do anything, except against characters who could reach from further away. In which case, he's more so whiff punishing their own attempts to reach him than anything else. He has such good lows and in general flows that you're just not getting anything out of that situation most of the time. In general, therefore, don't assume that just because a character can zone quite well, that the actual act of using their zoning moves is the main strategy you should be using for controlling an opponent. One of the main tricks that we face facing off with each other in most matchups, therefore, is the fact that once I've gotten to the point of being knocked down, my opponent assumes that I'm the type to do specific things, and it's easier to bait than to actually attack. Meaning that after many knockdowns, the best thing I can do on wake up is throw. But that's another good sort of reasoning for why just straight zoning isn't always a good plan. A lot of Roa zoning is so slow as to be reactable, and normally that doesn't mean much, but this game is not your standard game. Even in such games, there's usually one or two characters that can get to you that quickly or do something damaging at that range. But look at that range. Even that decision was based on not only thinking my opponent was going to defend, but also thinking you don't have enough meter to beat the thing I'm about to do as quickly as you would need to beat it. Similarly, making my opponent flinch thinking about whether or not a charged move I'm launching is actually intended to hit them or just to make them block long enough to get thrown shifts around a lot of things. And another good example. I should have just gone for more throws. This, therefore, is now the last on-stream match of the night, possibly the last match of the night. There will be no stream tomorrow because we will probably be doing things related to logistics for Combo Breaker. That said, despite this, there will still probably be something on Thursday for our Feeling Thursday stream of King of Fighters 15. We are completely unsure of the status of weekend content, again partially because of Combo Breaker. Oh, I missed. As always, our bots for our various games can be found at our website 2-mk.org. Apologies for the slow release of bots, as we're still working really hard on making sure that bots are easy enough to input, as nearly none of the games we currently make bots for save the inputs long enough for this to be considered helpful. And if the game isn't saving the bot inputs, what is it even helping to do? If you can't input it quickly enough, it's no use at all. You can therefore expect to see no tweets from us tomorrow on our Twitter, 2_MK_FGC, because we have no streams, therefore no reason to tweet.
ちの海に帰る時だ。
But with my Rift Throw, we've come to the end of our stream entirely. This has been Rillian for Team 2MK. Good luck with your training. Good night, everyone.